So my name is Peter Warren. I'm a bonsai professional, and my history in bonsai is I did an apprenticeship in Japan quite a few years back now, under Kunio Kobayashi at Shunkai Bonsai Museum in Tokyo, and I kind of fell into bonsai a bit accidentally. I kind of got into it when I was out in Japan. I was living out there for a year and wanted to learn something Japanese, sort of traditional culture, and I had an interest in plants and nature. And the minute I first saw bonsai, I was captivated by it and started to study. But one of the things that really captured my interest was the kind of the museum itself. And the nursery that I studied at had a number of tokonoma display areas, sort of similar to this, and they had bonsai on display there, and it was the kind of the artistic representation of sort of natural scenes using bonsai that really kind of got me, and has been a kind of like a constant thing throughout my bonsai career, and so that's kind of an area of interest for me. And throughout my apprenticeship, so I spent essentially 6 years apprenticing there. I was responsible for putting on lots of displays in tokonomas as well as exhibitions. And so we had clients who would exhibit at the national level in bonsai exhibitions and satsuki exhibitions as well as suiseki. And so exhibiting trees and stones and things was a very big part of what my studies entailed. Subsequent to that, pursuing bonsai as a career across the world. I've been involved with exhibitions, national exhibitions, and sort of judging those, as well as preparing trees for lots of different exhibitions for customers as well. This display area that we see here was built 2021, sort of a lockdown type thing. It's something that I'd always wanted to do, because the display of bonsai is kind of like, I would say the end goal, but it's one of the kind of the goals of doing bonsai is to put it on display and to enjoy and appreciate the trees off of the bench or from a less technical perspective, and sort of creating a space which enabled me to explore a lot of the ideas and aesthetic ideas around bonsai was something I always wanted to do. With the help of a couple of very talented friends, we managed to build this display area, and occasionally throughout the year I do manage to put on a few little displays for my own benefit, mostly. I've been involved with the Expo Bonsai exhibition since its inception. Steve Hale, who organises it, is a good friend, and we spoke in the run-up to him sort of setting up the exhibition as well as it's been running. And his main goal was to create an exhibition where display was a key part of the overall experience, and he always wanted the judging to take into account the quality and the thought behind the display. So not just looking solely at the form or the shape of the tree, like how impressive what a single tree was, but how the character of that tree was enhanced by the items it was displayed with, be it table, scroll, accent plants, etc. And to really kind of take it as a total rather than just the tree itself, which a lot of exhibitions sort of tend towards. He really wanted that sort of focus on the display element of it. And after a couple of exhibitions and some judging decisions that perhaps didn't take that into account so much, we kind of came up with a new way of judging the show, whereby the exhibitors themselves got to choose from a number of nominated trees. So Steve and myself nominate the trees which are at the high level, worthy of, where the displays are worthy of an award, and then the exhibitors themselves pick out their favourite, and whoever receives the most votes from the exhibitors wins the award. And so that was another sort of step forward in trying to promote the idea of the display being the key thing, rather than just having a very, very high quality tree placed on a bench. And in addition to that, critiques were offered by myself, whereby exhibitors, I would sort of talk through the positives and the areas that could be improved on exhibitors' displays. And after doing that for 2 years, it became apparent that there was a desire for more knowledge. People didn't know where to go to learn some of the key kind of ideas about display. And so after last year's expo, I kind of thought about doing a workshop myself. And I had some ideas about how I could perhaps do that. And then a couple of weeks later, Steve came to me and said he was thinking about doing a workshop, and would I be interested in perhaps running it, or sort of guiding it. And so it was kind of a natural progression. People wanting the knowledge to help them to display their trees at a better level. And so we kind of came up with this idea of creating a workshop where some of the sort of fundamental ideas of display could be explored in a sort of a communal and collaborative affair. And so hopefully we'll be able to dispel some of the myths about bonsai display, and give people more confidence to put on a display that will bring out the best character of their trees and show them off to their best.
For those that don't know me, my name is Steve Hale, but I think most of us have met. I'm responsible for the actual exhibit side of the Expo show, which is a team effort by the UKBA guys. And the reason that we're running this is basically to help you as exhibitors with Expo, but the things that you're going to learn today will be applicable to most shows. Most shows where you want to display trees will be looking for these same sort of techniques. And one of the big misconceptions about the Expo show is that we only do it the Japanese way. You've got to have a scroll, you've got to have an accent, blah, blah, blah. And that's really a misunderstood situation, because right from day one, the submissions paper were always said traditional or contemporary. Having said that, the traditional techniques which are going to be talked about today involve quite a great deal of artistic science, if you like, for want of a better expression. When we did the first expo, I counted 5 accents on the wrong side of trees. Further to that, I saw a couple that were facing the wrong way, and these are all fairly basic mistakes. As a nation, I think we've got fairly complacent with displaying trees over the years, and people just think, oh, I need an accent, I've got a show tomorrow, and they pop down the garden centre and they pick out a pretty flower and that's it, job done. And there's way more to it than that. We want to encourage way more to it than that. And that's the whole purpose of Expo. Further to what I've just said, for anyone who wants to display within Europe, I think you're going to find what we talk about today to be quite useful. What I did was I spoke to one or two people about holding this workshop, and today's speaker, I felt, gave a really broad overview of the way that we run the show. And there's a reason for that, because he's one of the two judges. It makes sense that we do it using Peter today, because he's going to tell you what we're looking at when we wander around with clipboards. The other reason I picked Peter was his background. He's the only ex-Japanese apprentice currently working in this country, and he still goes back and he's involved with shows still, and he always was. So he can bring that aspect of it to what we talk about, but he can also bring that artistic side to the fore as well. So without any more messing about, I'd like to introduce you and welcome Peter Warren, who's kindly offered to help us today. Unbeknown to many, he gives me a great deal of help with the show, behind the scenes and on the day, and I really, really appreciate that. So I'd like to give him a big thank you for coming today and leading us to that next stage. Peter, the rest of the day's yours.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I think that's this one covered. Who am I? As Steve said, I've got a lot of experience of sort of bonsai display. Am I in the way? Yeah, you all right? If I am, just say. A lot of experience of bonsai display in Japan. I did an apprenticeship out there, and where I studied, there are lots of tokonoma areas, so areas for display. And part of my apprenticeship, part of my job there was to create lots and lots of displays in those spaces, okay, as well as preparing trees for exhibition at the highest level. I just do want to kind of reiterate what Steve said about it not necessarily being very focused on Japanese aesthetics and things like that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's a very sort of key thing. All right. But as Steve mentioned, the goals of this workshop really are to give you an idea of why we display, as well as some of the more sort of technical and practical things to do. And that will be mainly once we get into the sort of the second half of it. Right? The first half, we're just talking about a lot of the ideas and concepts around display. Second half, because you only learn by doing. And it's a three-dimensional thing, three-dimensional art form, and actually putting the trees on display and looking at them in 3 dimensions, moving them around. That's where the most learning of the sort of the practical side of it can get done rather than on a screen. Okay. This is a disclaimer. Lots of things about bonsai, very artistic. The design of bonsai is parts of it, there's an artistry to it. The display of bonsai, once we take it off of the bench and we start to put them on display, is an entirely artistic thing to do, okay? And it is subjective. You don't have to like it. Conventions have come about, mainly from a lot of the sort of the Japanese practices, okay? But those Japanese practices are based on basic sort of design, artistic principles, things about line, space, and form. Okay, and they hold true across many different art forms, and we can sort of see how they relate to bonsai. Okay, but again, those things are still subjective. Personal preference is very, very important and should be respected. If somebody else says they like it, that's fine. You don't have to like it. But one thing that I'd like you to try and take away from today, going forward, is that you should be consciously cultivating your own preferences. Right? You should be looking to try and look at why you display bonsai. Right, and developing aesthetic tastes. When you're looking at displays, you might not like it. It's fine. Okay. Who likes music here? Everybody likes music. Right? Who likes classical music? Who likes jazz? There's all sorts of different types of music. You don't have to like all of them if you like music. However, banger is still a banger. Doesn't matter. Right? If it's Beethoven's 5th Symphony, when you hear that, that's a banger. Doesn't matter if it's soul music. There's some absolute quality soul tunes. There's even some thrash metal, which is pretty good too. All right. Good music, doesn't matter what genre it is, will appeal to a wide number of people because it ticks lots and lots of boxes. A good bonsai display, doesn't matter what style it is, will appeal to a lot of people if it ticks all the right boxes. And those boxes are basic design principles. But what's very important is to think about why you do bonsai, and what does bonsai give to you, and what is your taste in bonsai. This was one of the trees, one of the displays at last expo. I respected this much more than some of the really, really high quality trees that were on display, that were displayed badly. There were a number of very expensive, high quality trees at this year's exhibition that were displayed without any care. This one I respected a lot. Why? Because there was commitment. There was a distinct aesthetic. The people who set it up had a clear idea of their taste, of what they liked, and they went about it consciously and effectively. Do I like it? Doesn't appeal to me, but I can still respect it because of that commitment to it. There's a lot more thought and care and effort gone into this, and this is what we want to see in bonsai displays. Right? This is where it elevates it from just being a tree on a bench put on the table to being something artistic. You don't have to like it, but you can respect that. This is my aesthetic. Okay? This is what I like. I don't do bonsai for anybody else. All right? This is my aesthetic. Okay? Very simple. Use of space, playing around with space, minimalism, lights and shadows. This is what I like. This is my aesthetic. Oh. All right? Why do I like this? Because I'm miserable. Because it allows me the space and time to think about the ephemeral nature of life, suffering, and the inevitability of death. And that's why I don't get invited to many parties. Those are the aspects of bonsai that I like. Not all the time, but that's one of the reasons why I do it. That's my aesthetic. That's been cultivated over 20 years, still going now. These are the things that I saw that resonated with me. You don't have to understand it. We have to look at developing, cultivating your own tastes, committing to those tastes and going with it. As Steve said, it doesn't matter if it's modern, classical, Japanese, British, European, whatever. Right? The style and the concept of things doesn't really matter as much as how it's done. And staying true to those principles and the objectives of bonsai display. So it doesn't matter what it is, how you do it in terms of the style. Right? As long as it stays true to those principles and the objectives of bonsai display, it will be successful. So, before we go through, I want to try and make this not too kind of like a university lecture on philosophy and stuff like that. But there are some sort of definitions and some words that might be used which it would be a good idea to kind of like really make sure that we do understand. When I say about the aesthetic, what I mean by that is a set of principles or characteristics which relate to an artistic style. What aesthetics is the philosophical study of is beauty. Okay, so this is talking about these set of characteristics, ideas about what you personally find beautiful. So when you look at it, you think that is beautiful. And it runs deeper than just the physical form of it. And when we come to bonsai display, what we're trying to move away from is just looking at form. It's not just the shape of the tree that's important. It's not just how it looks. It's how it makes you feel. And when we're looking particularly at display, all of those things put together, it's about creating a feeling. Right, so a little bit, just have a quick look at the sort of the difference between sort of exhibiting and displaying. And this is sort of going into like the history of bonsai display in Japan. Looking back at sort of the textbooks and the books about bonsai or about bonsai in Japanese, there's very little sort of mentioned about artistic display up until about the 1960s. So all the books previously up until then use this word called chinretsu, which means to set up so it's easier to see, which would be the equivalent of saying exhibiting something, like putting it just in a gallery, just lining trees up so that you can see them easily. After that, we start to see the word kazari come into use, okay, which in Japanese means to decorate. So the equivalent would be to sort of create a display, right? And so the use of that word is relatively recent and relates sort of very much to the space. Okay, so looking at some of the kind of the ideas of how bonsai has traditionally been exhibited on this chinretsu style, so just lining up making things easy to look at. There's one from Expo. This traditional kind of putting things on display. If your tree is shown here, well done. But this is a sort of a traditional type of and modern way of lining trees up so they're nice and easy to see. Right? And when we're starting to look at things from an artistic sort of perspective, looking at the context is very important. And space and occasion, the space-time occasion is very important when we're sort of looking at bonsai. Exhibition is lots and lots of trees all lined up, okay, rather than a unique meeting in a very sort of intimate location. Okay, the displays that I created that you saw, my aesthetic, were in my workshop, little space that I created, okay, for me, very intimate little sort of situation, okay. And when you do that, we're kind of looking at trying to think, put a lot more sort of care, artistic input in order to sort of set the mood, okay. So when we're looking at these sort of tokonoma type displays, okay, these are separated from other trees, creating this distinct space, this distinct area in order to really create a picture. The use of space is very, very key here. So it creates a completely different vibe from being in a sports hall. Okay. And these are all very sort of traditional sort of Japanese looking elements. Now, when we come to looking at more sort of modern exhibition displays, particularly in the Western world, we tend to see people try to do two different things at once. And sometimes that works very well, and sometimes it doesn't, because there's a lot of sort of trying to combine things where you need lots of space into an area where we don't have a lot of space is the biggest thing. That's why space is involved down there. So trying to use those elements of tokonoma display in a 6-foot table, on a 6-foot table in a sports hall. It doesn't tend to kind of always work. So without sort of consideration for those things, then we can end up with some slightly less successful displays. Okay. Again, if this is one of your this is your tree or display, then apologies. But here we sort of start to see, we're seeing something which is dominating the space. It's very cluttered. That 6-foot square space is entirely filled up with stuff. This was at this year's display, and again, one of the limitations that we have with exhibitions is the location, okay, and the setup. And this isn't to be critical of that, okay, because unless people are willing to spend £50 to £100 per person to display, is anyone here prepared to pay that? No. Not many people are prepared to pay to exhibit. But unless people are willing to pay a lot of money, then we're sort of limited to what the sort of can be done within a sort of traditional kind of modern exhibition. But so sort of understanding that and trying to fit the tree to the space and fit all the other elements to that space is a key thing for success. So trees that are slightly too large, very, very important to sort of consider that. So let's look at some of the objectives of what we're trying to do with bonsai display. So what are we actually trying to do? Create something of harmony. What's the ultimate goal? Create some emotions, tell a story. There we go, paint a picture. The key thing is to really show off the tree to its absolute best, to show off the beauty and the character of the tree to its fullest. That is what we're trying to do. We spend years and years and years, or maybe a couple of weeks, depending on if you buy a tree just before a show. Doesn't really matter. But years and years and years are spent working on these trees, and creating a bonsai display is the opportunity to show that off to its fullest. Everything that we do is to accentuate the beauty and the character of the tree. If we were displaying stones, we would just put stone in there instead of that. If we were displaying kusamono, it would just be kusamono instead of tree. That whatever that main object is, that is what we're trying to focus on and elevate. Other objectives are to try and transport the viewer to a different place, evoke emotional response in the viewer. It could be to allow the exploration of a metaphysical concept, considering the inevitability of death, for example, or potentially rebirth in the spring. All of these different things are objectives within bonsai. Other reasons for doing it and other objectives are to share with the community. That's why Expo, that's why Heathrow, all these shows are so popular, because we're able to share all of the effort that we've put in with other people. And having other people there is a key thing, which we will talk about later. Another part of it is to enjoy it. This is the culmination of years of effort. Okay, it should be fun. There are other objectives for doing bonsai displays. Some people do it to win awards, some people do it to show off, some people do it to create controversy or to move the art forward. There are lots of different reasons for doing it. What is very important on a personal level is to think about why you are doing it. What is your main goal? Which of these reasons speaks to you? But the one thing that should be key for whatever reason you're doing it for is this first one, accentuating the beauty and character of the tree. If that gets lost, then what does it become? Then we're moving away from the fundamental concept, the fundamental idea of what a bonsai display is all about. But the key thing is to ask yourself why you are doing it, and how can I go about displaying the tree in such a way that shows that off, that shows off my aesthetic ideas. So ultimately, what we're doing when we're putting trees on display and creating a display is trying to create this conversation between the displaying artist and the viewer. Okay, you have this idea about what this tree is, what this tree represents, and this picture that you're trying to create. And you're trying to convey that to other people. That is what the act of bonsai display is doing. This is my tree. I have spent years working on it. I love this tree more than my child. I wish to share it with the world. This is how I wish to do so. Right? That's what we're doing when we're putting trees on display. And then as a viewer, you're supposed to look at that and say, thank you very much for showing me your vision of this tree. This speaks to me, and I see this. Obviously, you're not having this conversation verbally. Okay, this is what should be going on within the soul. Or, if you know the person well enough, you can do it verbally. But what we're doing here is this kind of, it is a conversation. Okay, and you can learn from what the viewer might see, just as much as the viewer can learn from what the person who's displaying is trying to say. And this is where part of kind of going to a bonsai exhibition and looking and being the viewer is very important. The success of a bonsai display depends upon the viewer being receptive to the idea, understanding of the idea, or knowledgeable about the things that are on display. So for example, if we have a very Japanese display, the success depends upon the viewer knowing what all of those elements mean, represent in Japanese culture. If there's Japanese calligraphy or Chinese calligraphy, it depends upon the viewer being able to read that and understand that for it to get its most success. There are lots and lots of countless examples of people going about creating Japanese exhibits, Japanese aesthetic, Japanese style exhibits, where the elements are not correct for the season, they're incorrect for the style of the tree, but they just look Japanesey. And so if you're going down a certain avenue, it's about, like I was saying, it's about committing to that, about understanding exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And as a viewer, if you don't necessarily understand, it's up to you to either say, I'm interested in this and I want to know more, and then going off and studying and learning about all of these different things, or saying, actually this doesn't appeal to me, I'm going to move on. But what we do with sort of creating displays and putting them out there is you're opening yourself out for criticism, for people seeing what you're saying. It really is, it should be, if you're doing it at a very emotional level. It can be quite a very scary prospect. When I was an apprentice, we went, there was another bonsai master came to the garden, and this guy, Sudo, he was the head of this school of display. So he's very well kind of versed in display aesthetics and all these different, sort of philosophical ideas. And he said he asked me, he's like, did you create these displays? And things like that. So I said, yes. He says, do you enjoy displaying? I said, it's interesting, it's very interesting. He's like, are you scared of displaying? And I stopped and thought for a minute. I thought, am I scared of displaying? And I said, no, not really. And he turned around to me, and it was like a scene from Star Wars, and like Yoda turns to Luke, and he said, you should be. You should be. And then he just walked off. Why should I be scared of displaying? Because that's what you're doing. You are literally, you're bearing your soul to the world. Right? You're putting out there your ideas, your thoughts, and your feelings, okay, for other people to see. There is me bearing my soul. This is my aesthetic. This is what I like. It can be rejected. So that was really just kind of like a look at, trying to figure out why we do bonsai, why we do displays, and trying to sort of make you think about that kind of personal aspect to it and developing your own aesthetic. Okay. So now what we'd sort of look at in terms of kind of the judging of displays and what people are looking for, we'll start to look at this now. So what we're looking for, it's really quite simple. The criteria for a successful display is it's a display that is cohesive and coherent. This is, again, like trying to strip away all of these ideas about style, no matter if it's Japanese, modern, classical, or anything. What we're looking for is a display that is cohesive and coherent. So what does cohesive mean? It means united and it works together effectively. So all of the elements within that display work together and they're united. They're all telling the same story. They're not fighting against each other. So coherent, logical, consistent, unified whole. All of the things telling the same story. United, unified, together. Logical. It's really not that difficult. So all of the elements telling the same story, working together for that goal of elevating the tree. Does the stand make the tree look better? Does the accent that's placed with it make the tree look better, or does it detract from the tree? Is it adding to the overall picture, or is it detracting from it? A display that highlights the best character of the tree. Okay, so again, if we have a parkland-looking tree and mountainous accent plants, equally the other way around, then we're not kind of like really getting we're not highlighting the best characteristics of those trees, of that tree. The other thing that we're looking for, and this is a key thing, is a display that has effort and thought and respect for both the tree and for the viewer. Going back to what we said previously, there were, and there always will be, at any exhibition you go to, there will be some very high quality, incredible form trees, beautiful trees that have had lots and lots of money spent on them, lots and lots of time spent on them, lots and lots of effort spent on them, that are displayed badly, without any effort, thought, respect for that tree or for the viewer put into it. They're placed on tables at an angle, off center, any old accent is just thrown down. It's just like, yeah, the tree is enough. We're not looking for that. Everything that's been done to that detracts from the quality of the tree. It lowers it. Doing nothing would have been better. Somebody who has a mediocre tree can elevate that tree to a much higher artistic, aesthetic level through the use of effort, thought, and respect. By thinking about that tree, the character of that tree, how can I accentuate this? How can I multiply the character of this tree? How can I use this to tell a story? If you are just simply looking at the form of the tree and you wish to win an award, then that's what things like Chelsea for, RHS shows for, where they're just simply looking at the tree as a physical object. If you are looking to try and create a display which is more than the objects that are placed in it, then that needs to be done with effort, thought, and respect. A mediocre, like I say, a mediocre tree, if displayed correctly with effort and thought, can be elevated to a much higher level. And that, ultimately, is what we're looking for. The other thing that we're looking for is a display which shows a solid understanding of design principles. And those design principles are the things, such as line, space, balance, etc., which will, if utilized correctly, make the tree elevated, the character of the tree elevated. It will do all of those things. It will tell the story effectively. It will highlight the best character of the tree. And again, none of these things are dependent upon a style or an aesthetic. There's nothing there that says anything about aesthetic. It's just basic kind of design concept with the effort and thought and respect. That's something that costs nothing and is from the heart of the displayer. Going forward, how do you make your displays better? Most of the time, when sort of giving critiques or talking to people about their displays and giving suggestions about how they could have improved their display, a lot of the time it's due to overthinking. 3 or 4 of the people who sort of spoke to at this year's expo, I mentioned something. I was like, you know, perhaps if you hadn't have put that there, it would have been better. There was just too much stuff going on. And they said, well, I didn't put that there originally, but then I thought I should put something in because insert reason here. And this is where you think people are just overthinking things, where it's all happening in here rather than in here. Bonsai display and the art of bonsai, art comes from here, not from up here. Trying not to think too hard about it is very important. And that comes from having a definite taste, a definite aesthetic, and also from being observant rather than thinking too much, just opening your eyes and just looking and feeling rather than thinking too hard. So as you go around a display, an exhibit and looking at the displays, try not to think about it, just to look at it silently. How does it make you feel? Do you like it? Do you not like it? If you like it, why do I like it? And then start to look at all the elements and how they're combining and look in detail at everything and all the elements. And then start to think about, okay, well, I like this because of this and this, look at that. And going through it and trying to kind of like deconstruct it or think about how it works. And do that with your own displays. Part of the enjoyment aspect of creating bonsai displays is that playing around, putting different objects in and seeing how it changes. And that's what we'll be doing this afternoon. The other thing to do is to always be positive. Nothing worse than going around and looking at all the displays and saying, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, because you're just automatically in a negative mood. As a judge, I've got to try and be positive about every single thing. Giving a critique, I give what's known as the shit sandwich. Compliment, criticism, compliment. That's how you build people's confidence, that's how you look for positives, but equally can help people to learn. Another aspect of that, of looking at the displays and improving your own displays, is having a fundamental understanding of the character of all of the things that we're using, looking at the character of the tree. And a lot of people don't fully grasp that, don't look at that enough. And this is why we end up with trees that are displayed on the wrong side of the space, or things where there's just too much going on because they've not looked and fully comprehended the character of the tree. And the things that we're really kind of focusing on, the direction, where the space is, how strong, how visual, like the amount of visual mass there is, as well as like the actual kind of character of the tree. Is it refined? Is it rough? Is it elegant? Or is it strong and powerful? So there are trees that have very obvious directions. Apologies if you've seen this recently, but it will be good to go over it again. There are trees that have very obvious directions, cascade trees being one of them. Which direction does this move from? Left to right, coming the other way. So when we're looking at putting those on display, it's obvious which side we're going to be looking at putting them on. We always want things to flow into space. Other trees may be slightly less so, but if we look at the actual kind of movement of a tree, it's defined by the trunk line mainly, as well as the branch lines, and also the apex position relative to the base. So looking at this literati style tree here, there are elements which move in different directions, but the overall direction is from that way to this way, right to left, mostly defined by the position of the apex being well outside of the base of the trunk. If we look at the spaces in the tree, the larger space down towards the left-hand side, smaller space up on the right. Everything moves from form to space. Heat moves towards cold. It's just the way of the universe. The eye moves along the line and into space. A successful bonsai design will understand that, utilize that. There can be elements within a design which maybe go the other way. Okay, so on this tree we have these branches here which are acting as balanced branches to the dropping branches. We have the weight of the pot which helps balance it over, but the movement of the trunk, the movement of the dropping branches, the space, everything goes and flows into that space. Positioning of trees on tables and positioning of things in space is very important as well, as we will see with this tree here. This is a Kinsai azalea. Which direction does this move? From left to right, clearly. Branch length is very important. Another important thing here is the positioning of the tree on the table. This is a root stand Jita. If we look at that, this shows the distribution of where things are and what's defining the movement. Goes off to the left, comes back to the right, main line of the branch coming down here. This is sticking outside of the edge of the table. Lots of space here. We drop a plumb line down the middle of the table. That blue one, got a lot of weight on this side, got a lot of weight on this side, got some space. Eye flows into space, trunk line going the other way balances it, the nabari balances it, the pot balances it, and that is a successful bonsai design and displayed, at least on that stand, correctly. If that was placed in the middle of that stand, it wouldn't work quite as well. It would look as though it was falling over. Every single thing is case by case. It's up to you. The only thing that cannot be done, or should not ever be done, is not put down with any sort of conscious thought. A couple of centimetres off the centre is neither here nor there. Is that done deliberately, or is that done because they didn't bother to put it on the middle? Ever so slightly off at an angle, that's unforgivable. If you're doing it, commit to it. Generally, for the majority of cases, it will always be placed centrally on the table, but that's not always the case. Slightly off centre, slightly off angle, that shows lack of respect, lack of effort, lack of care. Right, which direction is this tree going into? It's going to the left or to the right? Depends which side of the screen it's on. This was deliberately planted in the middle of a pot, deliberately styled, because I planted it. It's been deliberately styled to be ambidextrous, vague, made it a very usable tree for display. It could be displayed equally on the left-hand side of a tokonoma or the right-hand side of a tokonoma, and it would work. It's an unusual case, but there was no real definite movement. And what you do around it defines your direction and defines the display. There should always be some sort of slight movement one way or the other. Even with a broom, it'll always be planted it should be planted ever so slightly off center. And this is where the act of display will help you with your bonsai design. When you actually come to display it and you're looking at all of these different characteristics and you're looking at the importance of line, space, movement, okay, which you will only really truly get when you start to put it in a space by itself and you're looking at how to sort of display it. That's when you will start to really fully comprehend the importance of all these design aspects that up until then, you've just been kind of like, oh yeah, this is what we do. When you put it on display, this is why we do it. This is why that space is so important. This is why I really need to plant it ever so slightly off center, because then when I put it on display, I've got the extra space on this side of the pot. But when you do have that kind of very subtle movement and very kind of ambivalent sort of style, that's when, coming to display, you've really got to really sort of think about it. Here's another one which could be one way or the other. That white pine moves from left to right. Movement of the trunk comes up, goes towards the left, then sweeps back down. This space in here is key. That strong branch movement is key. That strong branch movement is key. If you drop a plumb line right down the middle, a bit more space on that side. We're only talking very, very subtle amounts, but it is. There were a number of trees on display at Expo, which were very, very high quality trees, but because they were in full leaf, everything gets lost. Timing of the display, and all of those things, heights, etc. That's all part of it. Right? That's all about understanding the character of your tree and how to make the most out of it. This tree here, this is black pine, red pine, no, black pine, sorry, literati. Which side does it move to? Strong branch movement, got a weak trunk line. Well, it's a thin trunk, but it's got strong movement to it. Apex is off center. Lots of different components in there. In some cases, there's no definitive answer, okay? And then it's up to the displayer in order to get that out. Space has been mentioned, and it is really that relationship between line and space, which is the one that defines the direction. For this tree, it's this space under the branch, which really helps to accentuate the movement of the tree from right to left. That branch sweeping down there, this space under here is key. Equally, that sort of the lack of space up in there gives a very powerful aged appearance. But what's key to this design is that space in there. For this tree, the movement of the tree is defined and helped by the space here, which accentuates the strong lower branch. The lack of anything here highlights the movement of that branch. You'll also notice the ever so slightly larger space on this side. With this tree, all of this space at the bottom creates elegance. The space here, the space here, space between the branches creates the elegance. Leading from that, the opposite of space is visual mass. So like how heavy something looks, how much there is to something. So understanding this is essential for display as well as design and pot selection. This is a magnolia with a big heavy pot because it's going to balance out all of the weight of the flowers and the big leaves. Heavy trees, there's a lot going on there. This idea is very important with cascading trees, looking at balancing out. So when we talk about a successful display having balance, with cascading style trees, one of the ways in which we achieve balance is through the use of the stand. Looking at this tree and pot combination without that stand on a lighter, less bulky stand, it would be less successful. There is a lot of foliage, a lot of visual mass outside of the pot. We've got flowers, we've got leaves, we've got lots going on. It's very unbalanced on one side, and so choosing a stand, choosing a pot, which helps to balance that out, is key for making something successful. Here's a lighter tree, something a little bit more elegant. What's the characteristic of the tree? Fruity, upwards, outwards, elegant, looking for space underneath. Visually massive tree. There's a lot going on the top there. The stand selection matches that, but doesn't overpower it. It's not underpowered. Some decorative elements on there, but not taking away from balancing out the mass of the tree with the pot selection, and the stand is relatively good. A lot of people sort of look at describing things, particularly the Western way of talking about things with bonsai is like being either masculine or feminine. It's quite a crude shorthand for describing the character of trees and of objects, because what is masculinity? What is femininity? Most things lie on a spectrum and can have characteristics of elegance and strength, masculine and feminine characteristics, however you wish to describe it, coarse, refined, everything is kind of on a spectrum. And so looking at, this is where kind of developing your own aesthetic and your own ideas about what you like are important. Because unless something is very definitely one thing or the other, and most things are kind of somewhere in between, you can push it in a certain direction through the way in which you style a tree, through the pot choice, through the stand choice, through the way in which it's displayed. You can push a tree in a direction or another. You could give the same tree to two different people and come up with two very different displays, two very different feels. So for example, with junipers, you could have somebody who loves highly stylized junipers, who loves the foliage pads to be laser sharp on the bottom, the live vein to be polished, the deadwood to be bright white, shiny pots on a gorgeous stand, and that would be one direction to push that tree in. Or you could have somebody who likes something a little bit more organic, a little bit looser around the edges, put it in a pot which is a little bit more, groggy clay, rustic looking, more natural looking on a root stand. And that same tree could be pushed to different ends of that spectrum. Which is right? Both, as long as all of those elements work together in order to highlight that character. That's where the artistic aspect of bonsai comes into it. That's where the developing your own aesthetic aspect of bonsai comes into it. The problem lies when you start mixing and matching, and there's no cohesive and coherent way of doing it. This is where pot choice comes into it, stand choice, all of these things come into looking and pushing it in a certain direction. Looking back at the sort of the visual mass element of it, this is a deciduous tree. Once this is out of leaf, it will look completely different. The visual mass on the left-hand side would be much less, and so perhaps that stand choice, which is very ornate, you can't really see it very well, but a very ornate-looking stand might be not quite so appropriate. Looking at and understanding that kind of that idea of visual mass is like stuff that's happening, branch lines, flowers, leaves. Here we have something which is a little bit more feminine. Flowers don't equal feminine. What's the key is the space, the lines, the elegance, the looseness of it. When we're looking at species of trees, the white pines tend to be a little bit more feminine. We tend to see more grace and elegance of line, the length of the needle, branch structure, needle type. Red pines go even more feminine. Okay, so really looking at and understanding the characteristics of the tree, species, style, all of those things is key for a successful display. Scots pine tend to be similar to sort of red pines, a little bit thinner needles generally thinner trunks. So we're looking at the more kind of elegant end of the spectrum. With mugo pines, we tend to see very thick, heavy trunks, dense foliage. The needles are shorter, fatter, thicker. So there's some of the more sort of slightly masculine characteristics that we got there. Deciduous trees, delicacy, elegance. So these trying to really kind of capture and look at and understand the fundamental characters of the tree first is where a successful display will be created. We mentioned it earlier about that difference between refined trees and rougher trees. Literati trees by their very sort of nature should be less refined, looser around the edges, more natural style, less wiring, less precision, more clipping and growing. Some trees are very suited to that. Other trees are suited to more refined, stylized styles. Could be both in a juniper. And how they get displayed, the pot choices, the stand choices, everything should be designed to highlight that character, to push it in that direction. Styling choices were made on the tree in order to highlight a certain characteristic of it. That was the artistic choice, the aesthetic choice of the person doing it. Then that should be continued on through into the display. Now those same character features exist in everything that we use. In the stands, pots, accent plants, scrolls, suiseki, anything else that you can think of that we would use within bonsai display, those same things exist. Movement, line, direction, strength, visual mass, elegance, though, masculine characteristics, feminine characteristics. All of those things, all of those same character features exist in everything that we have. Here we have a root stand which is organic shape, uneven shape, rough around the edges. Here we have another one which has a lot more interest, a lot more visual mass, a lot more character to the wood, a lot more character to the knobbles, slightly heavier, slightly more visual mass. Here we have a lovely, elegant stand, outwardly curving legs. All of these things have implications on how they can be used. Here we have a stand, that big curve on the edge there, all this decoration, the lines, all of these different things add weight to it, add visual mass, push it in a direction that will be more suited to certain trees rather than others. And so looking at everything through that with that same kind of critical eye is key. And then we're looking at matching to accentuate the main tree. We look at our tree, we think of it as its character. Okay, it is this. This is what I like about it. I'm going to highlight it by finding things which are going to raise that up. So if we have a lovely, elegant tree and we place it on a big, strong, powerful, visually massive stand, where's the eye going to go? It's always going to go towards the stand. If we have an accent plant, which is very vertical, but we have a tree which is moving down, is that going to highlight the downward motion of it? No. And so looking at all of those different things and trying to find the balance, trying to find the things that are going to accent, trying to push the tree, that character of the tree, upwards, make it coherent, make it all sort of come together is very important. Creating a cohesive display does that. Places the tree as the focal point. All other objects act to accentuate that in terms of the character, in terms of the size and scale. The scale point is something very, very important in creating a picture, in creating a feel and an image. And the other thing that is key is the placement within the space that we have. So it's not just the objects that we have, but the placement. And how we place things within that space is going to affect the balance of things. How do we create something which is coherent? So something which is coherent, which has a logic, a logical coherence about it. Again, that comes from having that distinct aesthetic idea. So your own personal tastes, this idea that you have about what you want to create with your display. Once you've got that, then finding those objects in order to do that becomes relatively easy if you put the effort in. And those objects should be appropriate from a visual perspective. So talking about having the balance of strong and weak trees and such like. But also that cultural perspective. If you are going to do a Japanese style display, nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, even though we're in Crawley or Heathrow, wherever we might be. As long as you commit to it and you do it properly. A successful display will have gone into the effort to think about what is culturally correct, culturally appropriate for that display. Bonsai is essentially a Japanese art form. That's where its strongest roots are. It goes back to China, it goes back to other places, but modern day bonsai that we are mostly practicing has its strongest roots in Japan. And a lot of the things that we do come from that. And so if you're going down that line, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to do it properly. The other thing to sort of think about in terms of it being coherent is that idea of the natural landscape or the natural area where that tree would be found. A mountain tree, high mountain tree cascading down with a hosta. I don't want to pick on hostas, but a succulent plant, something that you would not find in that location, is not coherent. There's no logic to it. Thinking about it might be the right size, it might be have the right direction, but there isn't that same sort of feeling of logic to it. So what we'll look at is some successful displays and why they are successful. So we sort of mentioned about what we were looking for when sort of judging and what you should be looking for when looking at displays and determining whether you like them or not, and as a sort of criteria for appreciation. And things that we see in successful displays are written here. And the more things that you can kind of get in, the better. But then you'll have some things like, for example, variety. there can be too much variety, and that can throw off the balance and the harmony of something. So it's always balancing various different aspects. The more of these points that you can kind of have, the more successful a display will be. So variety, depth, points of interest, a clarity of the aesthetic, and that's what I mean about not having mixed and matched items, mixed and matched ideas, just having this vision of what you're trying to achieve and going about it. Balance harmony can often be to do with the size of objects, the positioning of objects, this type of thing. Things can be altered around in order to achieve that. Respect and effort have been mentioned, but will be mentioned again, but also quality. And this is where the quality of craftsmanship, of stands, the quality of pots, of the tree is important. We spoke earlier about taking like a mediocre tree and lifting it up to make a really nice display. There's a limit to how far you can take that tree. And the most successful displays, the ones which get the most interest or the most appreciation, are ones where the objects within them are all of high quality. Making the most out of those things is important. That's where the respect and the effort comes in. So, for example, the effort and the respect of going to dust your stands is important. So here are some pictures of some successful displays. This is a white pine on display at the nursery that I worked at, the garden I worked at. Here is another similar type of display. This was set up in Poland. I was doing a display thing over there with some lads, and we set up this display there. Very centrally placed scroll. We see the definite movement of that plant down and into this space. It's not a really strong movement within the plant itself. So looking at how that movement is created, we go from high to low. Ideally, it would have been a little bit higher, a little bit lower on this side, maybe a little bit longer. But how do we accentuate that space? How do we accentuate that movement? By placing at an angle, giving more movement for the viewer to definitely push it one way to the other. Adds that visual weight on this side, less on that side, flowing in. Here's another display. This is from a late spring, early summer exhibition. A similar sort of space to that we have here. This is a maple. This is where having accessory objects really defines the image that they're trying to create. Creates a very distinct, explicit picture. Doesn't leave much to the imagination. So we have a waterfall going down into a pool where these two little fish, are swimming, and this maple growing in a forest next to it. It's very clear with what it's trying to achieve. All of the objects work very harmoniously with each other because nothing is overpowering the delicate nature of the tree. Sort of moving back to that point about having a clear aesthetic idea of what you're of what you like. This is what that person liked. He liked elegance, liked unusual movement, but that elegance and the space, the key feature of this display. If we look at the choice of stands, coloration of the scroll, all of these things are very muted, very organic, irregular shapes. Even this slightly rectangular board has an uneven edge, a little split in it to take away from the regularity of it. But some of the more sort of successful displays from recent exhibitions, this was very well appreciated by many people, and this was something which was unconventional, not normally seen, but was executed very well, adhered to all of the checklist things that we were looking for. Understanding of line, space, character. If you actually looked at the trees themselves, very mediocre material. If you looked at that when those trees were out of leaf, perhaps lacking ramification, perhaps still looking quite young, but at that time, the way in which it was displayed, that mediocre material was elevated to an extremely high level through very conscious, deliberate thought, a clear idea of what was trying to be achieved, this kind of fundamental kind of aesthetic idea, and very high quality execution thereof. Other things that could have been improved with it? Yes, certainly, but it was very successful. This was one of the displays that was nominated in the deciduous section. It achieves what it sets out to do, highlight the characteristic of the tree. It does so in a very effective way with some interesting elements, worked very well. What's very interesting to see with this, very important sense of scale with this little house, something we'll touch on in a bit. This was another very well received and successful display, well balanced, lots of points of interest, seasonally appropriate. One thing to look at and one way of evaluating, sort of deconstructing a display, particularly where we have multiple objects, drop a plumb line down the middle of the display and look at the weight of objects on both sides and the movement of objects on both sides. Looking at the visual weight of the tree, what's very important here is the positioning of little Zelkova a distance away from it. We drop that plumb line, we have a lot of weight here, we have some interest here. Because it's further away, because we have that distance away from it, what's important is that space there is adding to the balance. If this was any closer, then it starts to become imbalanced. Imagine a set of scales, a seesaw. If you're big, fat and heavy, and you sit right close to the centre of the seesaw, a very light person can go up and down, balance you. Principle of moments. And so that distance away helps to balance this. If the juniper was placed further across on this side, then that whole equation, that whole balancing, the whole visual mass and all the balance that's going on in there starts to become different. If this little accent plant wasn't in there, it would change things. Here's something which mixes a couple of different aesthetic ideas, something slightly more modern with the scroll, but what's very good here is this sense of scale. The movement of the rock from front to back pushes the eye back in. The bull looking backwards towards the tree. This is a nice balanced full stop for the tree. The tree has movement, but not great movement, not strong movement. Starting here, coming up through here. This space is important, but it's not like very powerful. It's not dramatic cascading branches or anything like this. Lots of different points of interest. What was very well received about this tree, what was very good about it, was the care, the effort, and the thought that had gone into the preparation and the presentation. The mossing that had been done, the thought and care presentation of this little accent. Slightly lower quality, less refined, still yet to be perfect trees, elevated to a higher level because of their presentation. The one thing looking at here is the accent, which was given an award. What was so good about this accent? It is a piece of limestone, subtle, seasonal, direction, heavy on this side, space on this side, very natural. It's from the area where trees such as this would be found. But what else? Scale and variety. Adam's not here, so we can look at this. Sorry, Adam, if you're watching this on the video, but this was discussed at the time. This is an example of a slightly less successful accent pairing. Why is this slightly less successful? Scale. The scale of the leaves, size of the leaves, and also the similarity. The leaf of the Stewartia, the leaf of the hosta, repeating itself. It's missing an opportunity to add layers of interest, to add layers of variety. When we have something which sets a scale, it makes the tree relative to that object. The little hut that we saw here, very small little hut, what does that make the tree look? Bigger. Big leaves on the little accent plant make the tree look smaller. Big flowers make the tree look smaller. What is our ultimate goal of a bonsai display? To highlight the character of the tree, to make that tree look bigger, imbue it with a lot more character. When we have things that set the scale, it makes it look bigger or smaller. Same object, different size, sets a different scale. Same thing with rocks. Everything. One big rock, one small rock. Completely different feel. And this is where kind of looking at the character of all of those objects and how they relate to your main object, to your main objective is of key importance. So there's that list again. All of those displays had some of those characteristics. And then how we go about using those objects in terms of the placement is key. It's a very simple display. That is a cryptomeria. Single trunk, splits into three. 1, 2, 3. The scroll has 3 drops of snow. This was displayed in late November for an exhibition held in a temple in Kyoto. There's 3 objects. What makes it so successful and work to achieve the aesthetic goal? The use of space, use of line. Everything about that was very specifically and deliberately chosen and placed in such a way as to create balance and harmony, avoiding repetition. So if you look at where the center of the scroll lies, it's exactly where the edge of the jita. If we look at the height of the tree, avoids the bottom of the scroll and the edge of this. This is a gap in the wall here. There's a little hole there which goes onto another space. Very subtle, very deliberately chosen. If we look at the length of the jita to the height of the tree, almost identical. Look at the placement with it on the jita. That is deliberately, not massively, but noticeably off center. So this is measuring in terms of pixels, deliberately chosen. You might not consciously think it, you might not consciously be looking at that and measuring, but these are the thoughts that have gone into creating that positioning of the scroll and the tree relative to it. Why does it work so successfully? We look at how things line up. That little second trunk pointing up towards the signature, the middle trunk pointing up towards the snow, which then takes us back down into the space. So something so simple has been deliberately positioned and placed, and items deliberately chosen in order to make the viewer do something, to feel a certain way, to go through that display in the way in which the person who created that display wanted it to. Now this is at the highest level of display aesthetics in Japan, but it shows the level which people will think and go to, and how the choice and the positioning of things plays a key part. All of the things that we have looked at there are basic design principles, ideas of line, form, space, and how to utilize those. Once you start getting into deeper cultural things, particularly with the Japanese display things, then that's a different presentation altogether. That's kind of what we're looking at with creating displays, trying to weave in all of these different ideas and strands and think about things from those sort of perspectives. Again, going back to one of the things that was first mentioned in terms of it not being about the style. It's about those fundamental core objectives of what a bonsai display is about, and that is to really understand and highlight the character of the tree and use elements which will accentuate that and raise it up to a higher level. A type of mountainous type image, so yes, perhaps a little bit more height. Just a little touch of colour would just add something, just another layer of interest.